Hello everyone and welcome back to our webcast. I'm AC Coppens, I'm the founder of The Catalyst, and well, we do this fast forward webcast. We are a boutique consultancy agency boosting the development of innovative and creative players in digital tech, media, science, and film, music, design, and the arts. And in addition to strategizing for companies, curate or program conferences, and very often MC them, we also represent a number of talented speakers, including Caroline. So we've decided to bring these speakers and their insights to you to help us make sense of our current situation and what it means, especially for the creative industries and for the media. And this weekly series of online talks, this monthly series, we went from weekly to monthly actually because it is quite a lot of work, and are for people working in the conference and event space, but also beyond, for established and emerging speakers also, and for anyone who is fascinated by how science, innovation, and new technologies shape creative work and society. So hello, yes, we will start with the recording now. Hello everyone. For the 9th episode of our webcast, Fast Forward, we are delighted to be joined by Caroline Sinders, a machine learning design researcher and artist. And this will be quite an advanced session today. For the past years, Caroline has been examining the intersection of technology impact in society, interface design, artificial intelligence, abuse, politics in digital spaces. She holds a master's from the New York University's Interactive Telecommunications program and is the founder of Convocation Design Research. It is an agency focusing on the intersection of machine learning, user research, designing for public good, and solving difficult communication problems. The research of Caroline and her expertise spans a range of topics: ethical design, AI, human equality, women's empowerment, surveillance, art, and technology. And as a designer and researcher, she has worked with big corporations like and associations like Amnesty International, Intel, IBM Watson, the Wikimedia Foundation, and others. She has held fellowships with the Harvard Kennedy School, the Mozilla Foundation, Yana Bueno Center for the Arts. I think I'm going to stop because there are too many of them. She has been working with the support of the Ford Foundation, the Knight Foundation, the Open Technology Foundation Fund, and her work has been featured in the Tate Exchange, in Tate Modern, Victorian Albert Museum, MoMA, PS1, Laboral, Ars Electronica, Wired, etc., 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 etc. And yes, to introduce shortly what she's going to talk about, because AI can and shall solve problems from prediction to recommendation to classification and beyond. But no matter how accurate AI solutions are, they won't be relevant and adopted by people without trust. And also it means without great design work, but we know that less sometimes. So the practice of design starts long before the visual look and feel. So it is, and it also continues afterwards. So design spans, we will see this with covering problem space exploration, user research, journey mapping, prototyping, etc., data visualization, user testing, etc., VUI, and more. And it creates a vital connection between humans and machines that allows AI systems to perform. And at the end, AIs are built for people to solve, by people to solve problems for people. So we need to explore this a little bit more. And in her talk, Caroline will look on how AI creation is a multi-layered process, seamlessly weaving together technological advancement with the values and biases of people and organizations who are behind these processes. So in time where we revelate many of the power structure that lay the ground of our society, how, through the tool of design, can we make AI transparent and understandable? And how can AI be a safe technology? Okay, I think I spoke too long. Caroline, now it's your turn, please.
Thank you all so much for being here. I'm excited to present this, I guess, my work to you. We'll be talking a lot about design and art, and not just in AI, but really how design and art can can be used as metaphors and provocations, generally, and in unpacking varying forms of technology, and really like complicated technology. What I like about design and art is that it can sort of function in a way as metaphors, and as explainable metaphors for everyday audiences. Usually I introduce myself, but AC has done an amazing job of introducing me, so I don't have to tell you my background. But I always like to contextualize my work in my educational background, where I was trained in photojournalism research, and then I received a master's in technology design and art. And so I tend to see the world through this lens of legibility and research storytelling. And these are skills that I honed as a photojournalist. And within these skills, I make art, and I also do human rights research, focusing through the lens of how design and technology affects people in their everyday lives. And how I define my practice is really research driven, though one could also call it even process driven. It's art that is shaped and driven by research, be it quantitative or qualitative. I don't make data visualizations, but I could. But perhaps the best way to think about this is, what if you made net art or technology-based art, but with the same principles as photojournalism? So much like photojournalism, research-driven art uses specific structures and a sense of purpose to contain it. These constraints work much like the way a skeleton works. While they stabilize the practice, just as a rib cage stabilizes the body, they do not define the entire practice, nor keep it from moving and flexing on its own. In this way, the research I do stabilizes and shapes my practice and my art, but it does not dictate the outcome of what I'm working on. And recently, what I've been exploring is actually the notions of usefulness in relationship to technology and art. So in late May, after the United States erupted in protests for Black Lives Matter, and after George Floyd's death, I was looking online and saw a number of curators and critics remarking on social networks about technology artists, read generally white and male, and their roles in unpacking technology, injustice, and activism. And this inspired me to write an article. Over email, I interviewed the curator and writer Nora Khan, and we discussed artistic practices during moments of cultural upheaval. Khan wrote to me, how might critical technological work be called on in this moment to do more? Coded design work has that capacity. Hybrid research practices can explain and expose the logics of racial capitalism, but under the auspices of artistic collaboration, they can enact critique, make an argument through process and through this built system. So that's the end of Nora's quote. And this idea of usefulness and interdisciplinary work is really key and a necessary part of research-driven art and a research-driven arts practice. And it is directly inspired by work by Tanya Bruguera's arte utile methodology, which translates to utilitarian art. Arte utile draws on artistic thinking to imagine, create, and implement tactics that change how we act in society, again, heavily focused on usefulness, on tool building, and on communities. Khan, in our email exchange, highlighted these strengths of work needing to stretch across domains, making art as a necessary Trojan horse to discuss useful change. Personally, this is where I turn to the work of American artists, Frances Singh, Joanna Moll, Adam Harvey, Mimi Onowa, forensic architecture, and others. These artists are pulling from research or investigatory-based practices, and with work that manifests into a variety of outputs, artifacts, writings, and education. The practices of American artists, or the anonymous group behind ScanMap, are great examples of social justice and human rights-driven art, with ScanMap's current work on tracking police scanners in the United States, or American artists' work, I'm Blue, If I Was Blank, I Would Die, and My Blue Window, two pieces that comment on structure and violence of the modern police forces. Other examples of social justice research and artistic practices are the works like The Hidden Life of an Amazon User by Joanna Moll, or Adam Harvey's V-Frame research, which came out of his numerous collaborations with the human rights archiving group, the Syrian Archive, or the investigative work of forensic architecture. One example of research and social justice-based practices is Mimi Onowa's. Onowa's research work on the politics and injustice of data sets have resulted in artworks like the Library of Missing Data Sets, and the widely cited and canonical zine educational tool, The People's Guide to AI, co-written with Diana J. Nucera. These pieces and artists occupy this liminal space of research, journalism, and art. These aforementioned works can also be viewed solely as art or as research, but are much more richly seen when viewed as research-based artistic activist practices. And in this context, art and design are the same for me. While it's a wordy description, it rings true to the intentions. These works aren't just to bear witness, though that alone would be worthwhile. They question, provocate, and then offer a solution to a problem. However, these works should not be viewed as a form of techno-solutionism. The solutions, in quotes, solutions that the artists provide are not meant to create an end-all to all other potential solutions, but serve to offer, rather, temporary or open source fixes for gaps in equity and violence created by society, and thus are poetic witnesses for those gaps. This kind of band-aid is a similar space where I pursue my own practice. Band-aids exist as necessary provocations or patches, while with participatory design and deconstruction, artists and human rights researchers, activists, technologists, and communities can overhaul the system or destroy systems together. The togetherness and collaboration is key, though. But nonetheless, provocations within art and design can create new imaginaries for new realities. I'd like to quickly show you some projects and explain where they came from. One art project, Social Media Breakup Coordinator, has come out of my nearly 8 years of studying online harassment and how systems and networks can create harassment. I look at the affordances of technology. Do UX and UI decisions mitigate harassment? Can they amplify it? And I think that they can. Think about if you were being harassed, what does a system allow you to do? What can you do to create safety in that space, and how can you be safe? Some of my research focuses on harassment of everyday users and then journalists who face really large threats like governmental censorship or surveillance, all the way down to what we could think of as more regular harassment, such as like daily harassment on social media or coordinated harassment campaigns. This kind of research has been supported by different organizations like Harvard and the Open Technology Fund. And with this research, it also inspires art as well. Social Media Breakup Coordinator comes out of the space of this research of spending a lot of time studying how content moves online and what we can do to react to it or stop it. And in the case of harassment, how people also relate to being online, how we as a society respond to being online. These are really structured and heavily designed spaces. What are new kinds of anxieties that come up? For a lot of victims, for example, regardless of technical background or job, this is something I hear journalists say a lot, they feel like they shouldn't be upset by what is said to them online, but you should be. It's okay to be hurt and affected by someone calling you dumb or sending you something as violent as a rape threat. It's supposed to hurt. So as a researcher, I look at these anxieties, and as an artist, I create explorations or interventions around them. Social Media Breakup Coordinator is a performance art piece that explores the very intertwined and interconnections of our online and offline lives. This piece has gone through 3 iterations since 2015. I'm exploring the connections between our digital tools and human intervention. Where do algorithms fail and humans must intervene? As users of social media, people live their most beautiful, angry, complex, and complicated lives online. And I am exploring a series of solutions following a breakup and how to coordinate, in quotes, a la a therapist or a social media coordinator, similar to what would exist at an ad agency, sort of following this messy decoupling of this algorithmic combinations and intersections of multiple people's daily lives. Like an algorithm, I'm creating a series of solutions that can be combined for a variety of situations, following one-night stands or best friend breakups, ending abusive relationships, ghosting, long-term partner breakups, dealing with how do you friend or unfriend a coworker, as well as a myriad of others. Every participant, when sitting with me as the coordinator, signs a legally binding document crafted by my collaborator, a lawyer named Fred Jennings. This outlines that I am not a therapist and not held liable for damages. Then users fill out a 21-point quiz where I then prescribe answers out of an algorithm that I hand wrote that is sort of combining 40 different suggestions. These suggestions are almost puzzle pieced together. but it actually causes the user to feel like they are receiving highly personal advice when it is in fact algorithmically generated. Social media breakup coordinator is a comment on the United States' lack of healthcare and mental health support, as well as the growing gig economy. Because in this project, I'm effectively a gig economy therapist, as well as a digital security trainer and advice givers. And so for a few dollars in 15 minutes, people fill out a survey and I give them real feedback. It started as first a kind of algorithmic feedback, me mimicking a real life chatbot, but then it started to turn into just really short feedback sessions. And the feedback and the questions and the interactions are all pulled from my very real research of seeing the general anxieties people have about being online. It's exploring this idea of expendable help and how anxiety about the internet isn't really taken seriously, but it should be. And so through this, I've created a series of public data sets about these anxieties. Then in February 2019, I took over Baby Castles again and hosted an entire month of social media breakup coordinator with new artwork, a video game arcade, and weekly talks with other artists and researchers like Pam Liu, Jacqueline Mabey, Charles Bukowski, Molly Soda, as well as others. Some of the games we installed were Wrong Box by Molly Soda and Aquam, Museum of the Saved Image by Flan, Yet Another Exhausted Day by Kindleman Games, Attacks of the Term and Conditions by Mace486, Wonders of the Internet by Let Off Studios, and Valentine Doom by David Ugg and Sub-Zero. The games themselves, combined with the talks and performances, were all mediations on the problems and anxieties within social media. We created a moving algorithm projected on a wall, inspired by our workshops at the end of the exhibit, while still holding social media breakup coordinator sessions. What you see here is Lauren Gardner, one of the curators, exploring the algorithm we created during the 3 weeks with the social media breakup coordinator data we collected. I also curated a series of art posters on disconnecting with technology and social media from artists and researchers like Sadet Harry, Merritt Kay, Helen She-Wolf Singh, Salomia Siga, and myself. And this is me in session at Baby Castles. Then later in 2019, I won a residency with Academy/Solitude, and I created a critical design-based chatbot. The chatbot is designed to respond to questions and care for the victim, as well as a series of open source best practices guides and what to do when facing a variety of online harassment. This bot is an extension of the social media breakup coordinator project. This bot also tells people that the user that the bot itself shouldn't exist, but it does exist to fill this void created by platforms, that the help and the feedback that the bot is providing actually should be handled by real people and trained professionals on these platforms, but that kind of help doesn't exist. And until that kind of infrastructure exists, this bot will exist. So my work likes to play with this line of being, line intention of being useful while also highlighting deeper issues at play. Another project is Higher Resolutions, made in collaboration with Hyphen Labs as a lead artist for the Tate Exchange at the Tate Modern. Higher Resolution, which ran for 2 weeks in September 2019, used interactive artwork, had interactive artwork, talks from international technology experts, and hands-on workshops to examine the state of power and privacy online, including widespread surveillance, to how AI is shaping culture and relationships, to the threats of emerging technology that can pose to human rights. We also then built massive sculptures that were installed to highlight metaphors around privacy and intimacy, as well as a floor schematic that moves all participants through the floor or throughout the exhibit based off how much data or technology they encountered when actually arriving to the museum. So it sort of asks the users questions about how they traveled there. Artists and speakers hail from groups like Amnesty International, Change.org, the BBC, the Carnegie Trust, and other international organizations. One of the reasons I was so excited to work with Hyphen Labs was the ability to bring in policy researchers, political activists, and watchdog groups directly into our artistic collaboration. It's important when creating activists and social justice work as artists to avoid replicating even unintentionally work done by activists out in the field. Instead, we can work directly with those activists. When fighting data surveillance, the best way to create change is to work together. And we can create levers of pressure in the public and arts institutions, arts institutions are a necessary part of that lever. We need to avoid creating work done alone only in the space of art, and we should seek collaboration with other activists and researchers who are working on identical causes. And this is one of the examples of the physical space in one of the sculptures we built. So the metaphors we were working with sort of highlight privacy concerns were the town hall, which is an analog of Twitter, being the most public, the park bench, which you see here, which is an analog of Facebook, in the sense that Facebook feels open, but also slightly like a walled garden. The living room, which is an analog of WhatsApp, which feels a bit more intimate and private because it's a texting platform. And then the loo, or the bedroom, which is an analog of intimate text conversations. There were also other art installations that spotlight the perils of modern technology, like facial recognition, website tracking, and harmful content recommendations, which is what you see here. We created a wall where people could vote on which features to ban, like website tracking, as well as tear off truisms describing surveillance capitalism. The goal of this project was to bring what can feel like very difficult or complicated conversations for the public, such as talking about privacy or what is policy, into this white cube space to transform these conversations and make them more actionable, understandable, and tangible for museum goers. How often does the lead of an advocacy campaign get to engage face-to-face with people who sign up for their campaigns or engage with arts organizers? Usually pretty rarely. Another example of research-driven art, focusing more directly on AI, is my art project and research project, Feminist Dataset, which started in 2017 as a response to the many documented cases of problems in technology and bias in machine learning. It is a critical research and art project that examines bias in machine learning through all the different steps of machine learning, like data collection, data training, neural networks. Eventually, this project will think of new forms of user interface in the projected creation of a feminist artificial intelligence. This project is inspired by the work of the maker movement, critical design, arte utile, the critical engineering manifesto, xenofeminism, and the feminist principles of the internet. So as I've said, Feminist Dataset is this multi-year project that's using intersectional feminism as a framework for investigating and critiquing machine learning. It is a trans-inclusive data set focusing on racial justice. It's extremely process-driven, so the outputs of the project or artifacts are more like workshops on data and machine learning. The workshops here are key, though, since they are a mechanism to think through what community-driven equitable data collection could look like. In these workshops, we discuss what is intersectional data and what does it mean. We talk about Professor Kimberly Crenshaw's work, the creator of the term intersectionality. But we also unpack intersectional feminism in writing. For example, an article about income equality. An intersectional feminist article would highlight that white women, Black women, Indigenous women, Latina women, and trans folks of all different races are all paid different amounts. So an article that simply presents all women as a monolith is not intersectional and cannot be in our data set. Within our workshops, community members then research and submit written data, be it poems, texts, blogs, transcripts, conversations. And through this joint combined research, we're also able to unpack what data becomes and how data is collected inside of AI and how much data we actually need. And this is another layer that's important to sort of unpack when we talk about how do we de-bias AI or how do we create unbiased data sets that they take time. We could think of this as farm to server table data in a way that it maybe more ethical is more slow moving. The only time my hand as a creator appears is to remove non-intersectional data, and I am extremely firm about this. Racists and TERFs need not apply. Metaphorically and pedagogically, Feminist Dataset operates in a similar vein to Thomas Twait's Toaster project, which you see here, which is a critical design project in which Twaits builds a commercial toaster from scratch, from melting iron ore to building circuits and creating a new plastic body mold. Feminist Dataset, however, takes a critical and artistic view on software. So we're asking, what does it mean to thoughtfully make with machine learning, to carefully consider every angle of making and iterating? It's a critique also on the process of making and the problems within software design, similar to how with Twaits, His was a comment on process and commodification and how invasive it is actually to make something as common as a toaster, and what that sort of commodification means in terms of sustainability. Here's an image from when Feminist Dataset was installed at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And a current project of mine, which is a part of Feminist Dataset, is called TRK, or Technically Responsible Knowledge, which is an open source project that examines wage inequality and creates open source alternatives to data labeling and data training in AI, and is a part of the Feminist Dataset project. So it's the next step in the project, which is focusing on data labeling and the systemic issues around labor, invisibility, and then thinking of the creation of maintaining data structures and how to train data algorithmic models under intersectional feminism. TRK was funded by the Mozilla Foundation and was created with Cade Diem, Ian Arnaud Fuma, and Rainbow Unicorn. Over 2019, I interviewed research labs, startups, and artists who use Mechanical Turk style services and microservice workers across Crowdflower, Fiverr, and Mechanical Turk. I even became a Mechanical Turker myself for a few weeks. TRK is an alternative open source platform for dataset training and labeling, which is a time-consuming but integral aspect of machine learning, and this aspect must be completed in part by a human. This tool offers a wage calculator that helps visualize what a livable wage could be for those who will be responsible for completing these tasks. As an artist who uses AI as a material to explore and make art, I was struck by how many startups, research labs, and artists use Mechanical Turk style platforms without any thought given to the payment structure determined for workers on that platform. Mechanical Turk and similar platforms have had well-documented cases of horrendous worker-related issues, such as severely underpaying contracts. In many instances, even if a lab or individual is trying to price equitably, the interface of Mechanical Turk works against that. If the machine learning pipeline is death by 1,000 cuts, think of TRK as one Band-Aid for one small cut. The project doesn't propose a solution for all issues related to machine learning, or even a major one for Amazon's Mechanical Turk. So many issues related to machine learning are issues of a deeper, more ingrained societal inequity, which can only be addressed through large shifts and restructuring in society or legislation. But within that, as a designer and a researcher, I try to look at what kinds of research can help alleviate or expose those issues. TRK focuses on how, through pricing structures, platforms incentives, and the invisible nature of gig work, clients underprice, undervalue, and fundamentally misunderstand how tasks are handled in human-as-a-service platforms. So part of the design thinking behind TRK is to examine equity and transparency within interfaces and the design of tools, and what kinds of problems tool design, UX, and UI can create in technology. Further inspired by the paper, Data Sheets for Datasets, which is a white paper, TRK injects plain text information into the dataset with information that includes a description of what the dataset is and when it was made. UX, or user experience design, is a utilitarian intelligence, focusing on architectural layouts, usability, and user flow. But design has a politics to it. It can suppress or uplift content. Design, much like technology, isn't neutral. As an artist, I use design as a material to confront and comment on the slickness and inequity of for-profit technologies. I think very similar to Arte Utile in the sense that I view design as this necessary tool for making how I want to interact with not just the internet, but the world. I'm an artist that deals with trauma and how the trauma and violence of others. Sometimes the tools I use don't work quite well. So what can I do to make them better? An interface is useful and expressive. I say this to you as an American based in Berlin, but I've noticed culturally how the United States relates to design as an artistic medium versus Europe, and design is not necessarily viewed as an artistic practice. So I encourage all of you listening to reflect back on critical design, the methodology of removing capitalism from the structure of design. Design can be a tool, much like technology, and much like art, to create political small acts of resistance and change. What kind of design can we make when we stop viewing it through this kind of very Western Silicon Valley neoliberal lens, we've seen code and art made without the constraints of capitalism. It's time for design to do that as well. Critical design, social justice, and design justice are needed now more than ever in tool making for design to confront how it's perpetuated white supremacy and change its relationships to power. Design can be an actuator for change, but design alone is not an entire solution towards injustice in society and technology. Design can confront a problem while acknowledging that it is a part of the problem. Design can help visualize or highlight parts of systemic injustice, but design must unpack and confront its role in contributing to injustice in technology, especially technology in Silicon Valley. I use design as an artistic practice and a lever to create usefulness to explore problem solving. Similarly, how these anonymous programmers and artists create ScanMap to provide a solution for surveilling the police, and Everest Pimkin created a tool to blur images for people to use at protests. Design can sit in a space to solve problems that are a part of bigger spaces and bigger issues. My approach to design thinking proposes a decommodification of art and situates it as a process and investigation. Artistic approaches to problems allow for collaborations that might not happen in other fields. And in this way, art's role in social justice and human rights projects makes space for new kinds of work in a way that other fields traditionally could not let those projects exist. What does change look like? It has to be interdisciplinary across many fields of art, activism, policy, and social justice working together and not separately. So thank you for your time. I think everyone is muted.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm muted. I was muted. I was saying what I liked most is, of course, design is as political as code and policy, because it is really like totally matching the goal of this talk. And I should have been saying maybe in my introduction that you see also design as arts in that specific case. And I was very much introducing about the design part, but of course you're an artist. So that's very interesting. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on this, that design and arts for you in this context are pretty much the same? You were saying something about it, but maybe you want to recontextualize this a bit?
Sure. So I should also highlight, and I'm sure it's probably very clear for most of you, that I'm an American and that I have an American accent. But in the US, there isn't really a deep understanding of design as an artistic practice. Design is often viewed through a lens of product design, and is viewed through this lens of, I would say, like, of capitalism. And this is even like, this is something I saw at least a lot in my education, being educated through art schools. Even as a photojournalist, I was a photographer in NYU's art school studying photography. And that's where we were engaging with photojournalism. But the way that sort of art is sort of viewed outside of photojournalism or documentary work is that something that's useful may not be art if it's designed only to be useful. So this is where, like, if one was trying to argue, is a car a piece of art? It's sort of like, does the creator view it as an art piece, right, or not? And so this is kind of where, like, design often gets placed, because it is paid for, right? You're creating a product or a service, something that people buy, and the intention is for it to be an entity that works or solves a problem. And thus it is not necessarily a part of like an artistic way of thinking. And so this kind of like specific separation, that someone can have artistic skills but work on a product, is what sort of separates design and sort of creates this very interesting gulf that is not necessarily crossed frequently, I would argue, in terms of work in the United States. Whereas technology-based art is like what jumps over that gulf, or like media-based art. And so this is how, for example, like Zach Lieberman, who's the creator of Open Frameworks, a programming language, his creation of open frameworks can be seen as an artistic act, because he also uses that to make art. And so it's under this specific lens that I approach using the skills I have as a designer and as a photojournalist as a way to make art. So it's kind of this specific mindset. And critical design is, again, is this design sort of methodology and movement that is engaging with this decommodification of design, which is also then starting to view it more as like this artistic practice. So I should highlight that this is just a very American, my view on it is very specifically American. As I've moved to Germany, I usually don't have to give a whole spiel about how I'm like, design and art are similar. And everyone's like, yes, obviously they are. They're so related because we're in Europe and we have a deep history of seeing how they're connected.
Absolutely. But I think this thing about usefulness and useful art, I totally believe that art, and also in relation with technology, can intertwine to create a better and more equitable society. So that's very useful. And I think we have been seeing this as the world froze this spring with music, film, books, having helped us to go through the experience, and the social value of art is an integral part of the human experience, right? But how do you think that art can dismantle technocratic power structure when we think about useful art?
Totally. This is where I think the work of Tania Bruguera is really important to look at, and especially Arte Utile. And so Bruguera's framing is that as an artist, you can create something that is entirely useful, and it can be art because you have created it. So like as an artist, you can make something that works. And then what comes to mind is, and I'm blanking on the artist's name that does this, but she's currently in residence at BAC in the Netherlands, is this cooperative that was created, I think either like partially funded by like the Liverpool Biennale, but it was a cooperative bakery in Liverpool. And that cooperative, while I think part of it was sort of inspired, or the artist was involved in it, it is a cooperative, and the cooperative still exists. But the fact that it was included in the Liverpool Biennale and falls under Arte Utile is what is important to sort of highlight, that this cooperative bakery was fulfilling a need, that there wasn't a lot of food services in this one area that's run by the community, that it sort of, again, solves a specific kind of function, but that maybe the conceptualization of it sort of came out of this need, right? So this is where I think of like useful, like sort of usefulness. Or if we think of artistic schools or educations that are starting to pop up, what comes to mind is the Black School or Dark Study or the School for Poetic Computation, that these are highly functional things, but that they would fit under this sort of goal of Arte Utile.
No, absolutely. And I want also to mention that Anna is putting everything, all the references and everything you're saying in the chat. So for people who want to dig into this, you can always record the chat, save the chat at the end, and then you will have all the links for you ready to go. So just mentioning this because there is a great research behind all of this. This is great. I would like to maybe just displace something, just make a little excursion in the, let's say, game, app, etc. department, talking about, this is something which is fascinating me. We do a lot with digital humans these days. And I wanted to ask you your own take on this. When design is really approaching to an aesthetic which is looking human, sounding human, sound design with a voice and etc., like interfaces with human beings that sound human, the closer a program gets to represent a real person or a human approach, the weirder and the less comfortable it is for the observer. I would like to know, what do you think? Why is that? Because it should actually build trust, right? If the design, in the final design, in the interface with the viewer is so great, it should build trust, and we want trust, but it doesn't feel like trust. It sounds creepy. What do you think?
I mean, I think a lot of that is like, so I've read that like maybe that's an evolutionary reaction to recognizing perhaps like an enemy or something that's not right. So if something like looks almost human but is not, we're entering what's called the uncanny valley, and
Yeah.
our reaction is to be repulsed by it. And so that could be like a defense mechanism that's ingrained, you know, millions of eons ago, right? In like
Genetically,
yeah.
yes.
But
Okay.
but I mean I think it's also just unsettling, you know, like I think it looks very like, and again, this is probably like an evolutionary reaction. But you know, it's like it's like I don't know if this movie sort of entered like the pop cultural lexicon in Europe, but in the US there was this big movie called The Polar Express, and it was like the CGI was supposed to be so accurate, and then it wasn't, but it is extremely creepy. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Alicia. And a lot of it was just like it looks like so close, but because it looks so close, it looks so far away from being human. And I think in these cases, even with I reflected on this a lot with like robots when I was working at IBM Watson, but I often wondered why we didn't make, for example, like Pokemon robots, because they would look so cute in real life and they would look absolutely not human, and perhaps the relationship would be sort of closer to them. And this is something that Dr. Kate Darling's work sort of touches on, is the ways in which we imprint emotions onto robots, especially things that we find like cute or helpless. Even though we know that they're not real, we have this sort of attachment in a way to them. And this is where I kind of wonder, instead of sort of aiming for things to be more human-like, why don't we aim for AI that is intervening in a conversational way in our lives, or in a service style way where we have to see the AI? Why don't we like let bots be more bot-like as opposed to trying to have them be more human-like? Why can't we sort of play up or emphasize more the botiness, if you will, of a bot?
Absolutely. I have still. Do we have any questions of what I'm going on? Because I mean, really, I love to go on. I have two questions left. It is like we were talking a little bit about biases. I would like to go back to values and biases we were evoking. Because we were saying in the introduction that, of course, it comes because we have people and organizations behind the creation and the design of such processes. And I would like to know, what are the values and biases you see as being the most positive or the most negative? I mean, talking about values and biases.
I mean, I guess like, it's hard. Well, I'm a person that works best always with like context and a specific problem. But I guess generally the problems of bias are that they replicate societal harms, and those that are most vulnerable in our society are the ones that are just repeatedly harmed and harmed and harmed and harmed again, right? So, you know, an AI system that has a hard time recognizing people of color, like people of color already face so much harm already in everyday life, and already so much friction and pain, that like this is just sort of adding more to it, right? But then it's also, you know, depending upon how it's implemented, or what the question is, right? Or how the product is, you know, getting the bias wrong, it also can have, you know, all of these kind of harmful effects, but it's harming the already harmed, right? And that is, you know, just such an awful thing to think about. It's adding pain on top of pain. There's no, you know, limit to pain where we've filled it up and it doesn't matter, you know, if there's pain. Like pain is so problematic, harm is so problematic in that way. And I think that's kind of the bigger issue that needs to be unpacked, right? Is that groups and vulnerable groups are again and again made to be more and more vulnerable. As for solutions around bias, I think like it always depends, and has to be very contextual. Like what works for one industry or what works for one problem is not a fix-all solution, right? So how we would go about solving bias in chatbots, we'd have to first say like, well, you know, what, like who's using it and what's the context, and how it was trained and how is it supposed to ideally work, right? So the way we would solve like a problem for e-commerce, for an e-commerce chatbot, would be really different from a chatbot helping you figure out how to fill out healthcare, right? Like a healthcare style paper, or like some kind of, maybe signing up for a new kind of like healthcare, right? Or trying to find a doctor. You would need to really separate those. And then, also then practically, like legally, those are very different areas, right?
Absolutely. No, I see the need. Unfortunately, we do not have the time to go into the more specifics of each industry, which would be great. I mean, we could do a full series about this, I guess. But I would like maybe to, for my last question, maybe, we've been talking about the debate around emerging human-machine relationships right now, but which is hiding other critical dilemmas and etc. But we have also the relationship between humans themselves. And you were saying in real life, it is like this. And now I see, if we have a look specifically of the relationship between humans themselves, which is shaped by who has power over new technologies, right? To what extent were these power relationships also between humans in your project? Which projects would you specifically highlight where you have been exploring this kind of asymmetrical, unequal and unfair relationships? Because this is, we talk about man-machine, but or human-machine, sorry, but look at us, human to human, right?
Totally. I think all of my work does in that way, because it's always something that I'm thinking about is like the power constructs. And so that's something, for example, we talk a lot about in the feminist data set workshops. And that's why I sort of gave the example of what is an intersectional feminist article and how is that data. So feminist data set, for example, is going to be a text-based project, which means I need to collect a lot of text, like a lot of books, poems, podcasts, whatever. And already, because all the text is different, this is where it becomes pedagogically very similar to Thomas Twait's toaster project. Like my AI model will be as misshapen as that toaster you saw, and that's fine. And that's like a sort of willing concession I'm making. This is where feminist data set is then an art project and not a very strict computer science research project, right? Because I don't necessarily care about the, perfection of the data model, right? Like I'm not trying to make a text model that is generating poetry, which would be, I would need a lot of poetry, right? Like a lot of poetry. But it's more about this like political and theoretical concept, which is what is intersectional feminism in our everyday lives. So it doesn't have to be text about intersectional feminism, but text that is intersectionally feminist. And that's where we have these really long-term debates about, and they're not debates of like in the workshop of like, is this, like, what is the most ideal thing? It's often like, well, what is intersectional feminism in practice? And that's where the example of the newspaper article is really, really important, where if someone were to say, oh, I think wage inequality is a feminist issue, and it is, but like, is the article itself then written in a way that is reinforcing intersectional feminism? Because that's the data I need. I need an article with that kind of nuance. And that's where it gets really interesting and very, very sort of difficult to find. And so that's why I give the example of women are not a monolith. Like women as a group have like lots of different kinds of hierarchies and bias within them. And so not all feminism is good. And so that's the kind of stuff that we talk about. And so intersectional feminism then by default has to center those with less privilege and more, and those who are more vulnerable.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I was also asking this question because it was actually an obvious answer. And I think that also the workshops that you have been organizing, or like a participatory approach that you are giving in some of the pieces show also like how it can also prevent or negative outcome or give control to those participating about the issues you want to deal with. So that's really cool. I just want to make sure that we do not have any question. That's great. I could ask all my questions. I'm very happy about this. I want to announce the next speaker